Now up for the who's who of the Joshua Perry Show, we have Nicole Auerbach, friend of mine, senior writer for The Athletic, and it seems like probably the most popular person in breaking news sports right now. We've done CNN, we've done NBC, we've done everything lately. How have you been?
I've been good. You want to be my agent? You want to help keep track of all of this for me? It's actually been affecting my sleep and hard to keep track of.
I know it's like you get whether it's the morning news, whether you're up at midnight doing these hits, it seems like all hours of the day and night you're popular.
It is kind of crazy because it's on such a different schedule than like sports, because they do a lot of like, let's talk at like 6 a.m. Let's do things at midnight. Like I had to NPR, which by the way is awesome. Like it was so cool to be asked to do NPR. I had to get up at 3:30 in the morning to record that.
That's a hell of a deal. So I actually did a radio hit at midnight. And that was like the latest thing I've done. And then I'll get up and I'll do like the 6:37 a.m. hits as well. But yeah, I mean, they will ask you, it doesn't matter. And obviously you with your background and your connections, like your information is coveted and the knowledge is definitely something that people are after right now. But I guess we'll jump right into it. We'll start off, we'll talk some of the college football stuff. We'll talk your professional career, and then we'll just get into who you are as a person. How's that sound?
Perfect. Also, just wanted to point out that there is some synergy here between Michigan and Ohio State.
Yes.
There is a friendship, is not all hate.
No.
Yes, I just wanted to say that off the top.
No, and I can definitely appreciate that. I've actually made some really good connections with Michigan people. Sorry, Buckeyes, but like Mike Martin, I got to know him pretty well over the course of the season doing BTN. Obviously, we've started a really good friendship here. And then some former players outside of who I've worked with in sports. Kyle Kalis is a guy who I played with. Fantastic people. So there is some synergy, but we've definitely hit it off in terms of a friendship between Ohio State and Michigan. So just starting off with all the Big Ten postponement, cancellation, whatever you'd like to call it, Pac-12 as well. What do you make of the situation?
Well, they're not going to play the season in the fall. I think we can start there because a lot of rumors and rumblings, which by the way got to the point where James Franklin was asked about it and he was like, what are we talking about? It reminded me of that summer of realignment where everybody had a source and there was crazy information floating around. But it's been an interesting week and a half because I think you obviously didn't see this type of backlash in the Pac-12. They made the same decision as the Big Ten. But it's a different environment. It's a different political environment. We already know how that's impacting these. You know, we've heard governors in the SEC and the way that they're insisting that college football is going to move on. You've got a first-year commissioner. You've got, states that are in different scenarios, different restrictions and rules and what they can do. I mean, the Pac-12 had two schools in USC and UCLA that couldn't work out. Like they couldn't be in their gyms. And so it was fascinating to watch. The rollout was very different between the two leagues. And, it certainly would have helped the Big Ten to have medical experts, medical reports or information put out. But it was almost like the reaction was just people didn't want to believe that was actually happening. So then for 8 days, you had coaches, players, fans, parents, just like kind of refusing to believe that the season was going to be postponed. But it is. And honestly, like this is probably not the end. I mean, we've seen the outbreaks at Notre Dame and UNC. I mean, even if you think the Big Ten moved too soon to do it and to call it and to not give it a little bit more time to try it, there's no guarantee that the SEC, ACC, and Big 12 are going to play a single game. So it's just been a fascinating few months in college sports, but especially as we're now in this phase where schools that are normally doing the same thing or doing different things or plan to do different things, it's kind of created a very weird dynamic and so much tension.
Yeah, and we talked about this too, from some of our discussions about it, and not to turn this into a politics show, and I can do whatever the hell I want because it's my show, but we talked about that political bias and probably some of the decision-making where the West Coast, first off, like California, Washington, when this coronavirus pandemic first started, they were hit extremely hard. And so they probably have a little bit of a different perspective. But when you also look politically, there's some of the states that have been definitely more with the stay-at-home orders and not getting back to normal life. The Midwest, obviously, is kind of in the middle of it, where you have some of their states who really didn't want to shut down and had a very visceral response. They had some of the other states who were Johnny on the spot when it came to shutting down and telling people to stay at home. And then, like you said, too, looking down south, it was just like, a 3-week shutdown. Everybody was back to business as usual. So it makes perfect sense just from that regard that these schools and these conferences would have those responses. But the thing that you brought up that was really interesting, and I want to kind of dive a little bit more into it, is you talked about James Franklin, and he was confused when asked about getting back to having some sort of fall season and, this maybe 6-team Big Ten conference type of situation. And then you hear the other thing that he said. It's not that he disagrees with canceling football for the fall. It's just a lack of communication and transparency in the decision-making. And then you go out to Minnesota, where PJ Fleck has been 100% on board. And Tanner Morgan even said that he appreciates the Big Ten Conference taking player health and safety seriously by canceling the season. And then you juxtapose that with Ohio State, where Ryan Day is hashtagging fight, and all of their coaches are retweeting players, and Justin Fields starts a petition. Mark Pantoni's probably been the loudest one on Twitter, and he's got a job to do in recruiting. So he has to show recruits that they're serious. But it's not even just the fact that, we didn't get that communication from the Big Ten Conference itself. It's the fact that you're hearing different messaging coming from different coaches, different athletic directors, and different university presidents as well.
Yeah, and it's weird because the Big Ten used to be just like the example of cohesiveness and everyone being on the exact same message all the time. Like you could never determine who actually felt like they wanted to break ranks because no one came close to it, right? So I think that's one of the pieces that has kind of made this all fascinating, why everyone is watching and why it's been, 9 days or whatever, and we're still talking about it, is because this is unusual. And, the Pac-12, the fact that they were cohesive, that they were unanimous, there was no players and coaches backlash, like that's rare for them. Like usually there's infighting in the Pac-12 and there's none in the Big Ten. And it was the opposite. I do think, if you're Ohio State and you had a team that could have won a national championship, I absolutely understand the frustration. And, Justin Fields putting out a petition showing how much he cares about football and wants to play, leadership, all these things are going to help him with his NFL draft stock. Not that it needed that much help, but there are benefits to doing that. There are benefits for Ohio State to continue to fight and to show this, that they care, that they wanted to play. They're going to be recruiting against these SEC guys who are going to be saying, your league doesn't care about football as much, which can we just say on the front, like, it's a pandemic. That is the dumbest argument to negatively recruit against someone. But it's going to happen. That's the fact. So I understand that. And I do think that ultimately the decision is based in science, based in health and safety. Again, everyone else might eventually get there as well. I mean, right now we only have 6 leagues left in the FBS that are trying to play. Everyone else at every other level has shut it down. So it's funny because the conversation isn't about like, wow, what a stand, what a great thing that the Big Ten did. And James Franklin brought this up too. He's like, this is actually a decision that should be applauded.
Yes.
But we're not even talking about that because people were upset that they felt like it happened sooner than they were ready for. There wasn't a ton of communication about like, what is a spring schedule going to look like? Because they hadn't really dealt with it. There wasn't answers for the players about eligibility scholarships because they don't have those yet. The NCAA hasn't determined that. So I understand the frustration, but I actually do think that James Franklin probably summed it up the best out of everyone, which is I don't disagree with the decision because you can absolutely defend the decision. It was just all of the other pieces around it and the fact that, and I've heard this from ADs in the league too, it just, you went from, okay, we're about to start fall camp and here are medical protocols to nothing. Yes. And I think they all thought that they were going to test out those medical protocols, right? And give them a chance because they'd spent months on them. So I totally understand the frustration. I get it. It's been more interesting for our perspective to watch all of this play out publicly because it never does. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that's where it is. And everyone keeps talking about a winter season now. So it seems like people want to start in January. We'll see.
I know. And it's so unique too from that winter season perspective, like I guess the question you ask for that is, are we even sure that we're going to be in a place in terms of how we're handling the pandemic that we can get back in the winter? And you talk about cold and flu season and all those other things that go into it. And the interesting thing too that you brought up with James Franklin, you know, we should be applauding this. I have a feeling that even if the rest of the Power Five ends up canceling football this fall, we're not going to look back and say that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 were trailblazers. We're going to look back and say that they were cowards who pulled the plug too early, even though everybody came to the same decision. And that really, really disappoints me.
Again, cowards for listening to science and health experts in a pandemic. Like, it's just the way that this stuff gets framed in college football is just bizarre. And we know this, like, we know the craziness, but it's still like, you have to take a step back sometimes and be like, why on earth would they be criticized for doing this?
Yeah, no, it's tough. And I understand the transparency aspect, and people are 100% right if they're mad that there was a lack of transparency and they felt like everything that happened, the tone change was a little bit too quick, and they didn't put their full effort into testing out some of the protocols. I can understand that, but to say based off of some of the science that exists and the fact that, you know, we watch now campuses that are filling back up, their numbers are going crazy. You can't tell me it was a bad decision. So you obviously talked to the commissioner of the Big Ten Conference, Kevin Warren. Was there anything you took away from that, just in terms of some of the things that he said or his tone during that conversation?
So that's actually one thing that people are not focusing on much, is that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 didn't start training camp. Like, they pulled the plug before getting to fully padded practices, whereas the SEC and the Big 12 in particular had been saying all along, we'd love to see what that looks like. Like, we'd love to see if, you know, does that mean the virus spreads more rapidly through a team, if they're in closer contact, you know, what happens to the O-line, D-line, and then also what happens when students come back to campus, right? Like, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 figured out, they were like, no, we know what's going to happen when students come back. We don't need to wait for that. And then also Kevin Warren was describing, you know, just the elevated risks of putting people in closer proximity for longer, and then potentially like the contact tracing piece of that, right? Like, if one person tests positive, does that wipe out the entire offensive line? Sure. So basically it was almost like they got right up to it and then decided they could see how it was going to work and they didn't want to put people at risk. And then he also said he felt comfortable with the smaller groups, the socially distanced workouts, like the types of workouts that they will be doing in the fall now. So I thought that was interesting, because people have wondered, well, if it's not safe, why are they still practicing? Well, again, it's a different type of practice, a different setup. And then I asked him about his son, who's playing at Mississippi State, if he is going to play this fall or if he's practicing with his team, and he is. And it's bizarre how many people act like that is like hypocrisy when it's someone who's in charge of 10,000 athletes and like they're, you know, is responsible for that, versus like an adult child who is over 18 who can make his own decisions and is in a different location. Like, so much of what we learned with this virus is it matters where you are in your local healthcare system. Like, if they have tests, if they can turn them around, it's different than like where you are versus where I am.
That's a big point too. Like, that's one thing that folks in Columbus have been harping on so much, is like, Kevin Warren, he's going to let his son play, and that's hypocritical. And I guess my response to that is, like, Kevin Warren makes decisions on behalf of the Big Ten. So if his son was playing here, his son wouldn't be playing. Just, he has no jurisdiction over what happens in the SEC, and his son is a grown-ass man, so he can make his own decisions. And how many times have you made a decision that your parents tried to say, hey, probably not the best for you, you know, we wouldn't make that decision if we were you, I don't know how safe that is, and you're like, screw it, I'm a grown adult, like, let me make my own mistakes. And this is the other thing that we kind of talked about too. We did a roundtable on BTN, and Howard Griffith was on there, and his son plays for Notre Dame. And the one thing that he said was that he was comfortable with his son playing, and now Notre Dame's going through their issues. And he said, I don't think it's that safe. But the other thing that he said is that he's going to support his son if he wants to continue to play. And when I asked my father, who both of my parents were presidents of Ohio State's football parents in 2014, he said that he would 100% be on my side if I said I wanted to play. with the knowledge that football is a dangerous game to begin with. So every time I'm out there, my mom's holding her breath. And the fact that if I want to play through a pandemic, there's not really much he can do to stop me. So he would support me in trying to find the safest way to do that. And so it's really interesting. And I think from a football parent's perspective, which a lot of people would lack, is that you support your child playing an already dangerous game. And so I don't know if it's just that or anything else, but a lot of these parents end up supporting their kids, probably understanding that there are some dangers along with the coronavirus, but it's just one more thing that's dangerous. It's not the only thing that's dangerous. And so I just feel like that's really unique perspective that's lost a lot upon a lot of people.
No, I think that's a really good point, because I think that in players themselves, you know, even if you're not thinking about it constantly, but like I thought that there would be more of a pushback back in June when guys went back to campus and they were being asked to return during a pandemic, because we know how much college football money, you know, they need these schools, right? Like I thought there would be more of a pushback there. You know, we saw that a little bit with the We Are United movement out of the Pac-12. Like you've seen people raise issues about health and safety standards, you know, and speak up about things, but there's no union, there's no like formal way to, you know, get the player perspective out there and to really like have a seat at the table. But at the same time, you know, it's easier to just, you know, we already assume risk. We already know it's, you know, this and that, like our, you know, our age group, we're healthy, like for the most part, like, you know, we're going to be fine. You know, maybe now we're learning about some long-term health issues that there's always going to be a risk at, but again, you're already taking on risk. So even from a football playing perspective, I could see that as you are in this environment and after being cooped up at home with your parents for months, wanting to get back with your teammates, wanting to get back to campus, and then now getting closer to the season and maybe feeling differently or raising the issues about health and safety protocols, right? Or your parents, like we've seen both ends of the spectrum on parents. Like there are parents that are concerned at various places too. But it's almost like there was a different mindset back in June where you just like wanted to get out of the house and get back and play football because you love it. And then now it's like, okay, what is that risk? What am I taking on? And then you have a bunch of players that again are already taking on risk, already understand that. Even if they're not thinking about it that way, they already know what comes with playing football. So it's really a fascinating case study, and especially for like amateur athletes, which I think, you know, we've talked about this a lot offline, and I think has come up a lot in the conversation because it is very different. There are reasons that things are going very differently in college football than in the NFL, than in the pro sports. And I do think it's been helpful to see prominent NFL players opt out, and so that at least the college players, you know, can see that that is an option, because again, the power dynamic is so different in college that I think it's very hard to push back. So, you know, any little thing that kind of empowers players, I support, but I think that there's, when all is said and done, if there's no college football games played this fall, like the list of reasons why that is immense. And it will include a lot of details about not having a union, not having player involvement in setting up the policy, setting up the season, and how it actually works.
No, that's a great point. And even when I was playing, Northwestern made that push for a union. And obviously, like, it's not a real union. It's more of a player representation group because they're not employees. But the fact of the matter is you want to have a seat at the table and you want to talk through all these things. You want your voice to be heard. And really, you want it to be a diverse group of players, too, with different concerns. You know, probably some at, you know, Ohio State, for example, and then you get some players out of Rutgers too, because, you know, Rutgers is going to feel differently about playing than Ohio State is. And then to your point too, when you talk about the NFL, it's not even a fair comparison. The NFL seemingly has endless resources in terms of money to pour into this thing, and then their guys are getting paid. So along with the financial contract also comes a social contract of, we're paying you X amount of money, we expect you to play. The social contract says you're getting paid X amount of money, so we don't give a damn what the risk is. You're going to go out there and you're going to play and you're going to be happy about it. And we're going to give you this opportunity to opt out. You're not going to make as much money, but these are the options and you have to pick from them. So I think.
Well, and can't they can also say like, you can be punished if you do yes. things that put other people at risk. Like, you could theoretically say that to college students, but how can you, it's not like you can fine them. It's not like you could void a contract. Like, it just doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't work the same way when they're not technically employees.
And that's the deal. It's like you're not going to not play a guy. Like if he's your best player and he was out,
Right.
like as long as he doesn't have the corona, you're going to put him in the game.
Right.
In the NFL, they're going to play the guy, but that guy's not getting paid for that week. And that's how that transaction works. So really, really interesting that you brought that up. All right. So real quick, if we're moving forward with a winter spring season, what do you think the best plan of attack is?
So it's a good question because I previously, before everyone started referring to a winter season, which I get, because if you're Ryan Day and James Franklin, you don't want this whatever abbreviated season to impact fall 2021. You'd like to potentially have guys play before the draft. I get all of that. But theoretically, like I've seen some of the models out of like junior college and the SWAC start later. They start late February, so you're playing in better weather. And I just think there's ways to do it. If you say like, and they won't do this, but if you said like, we're only going to have 6 games and, you know, you can put that over 8 weeks and do that towards the end, maybe your Big Ten champ plays the Pac-12 champ in the Rose Bowl or something, right? Like there are ways to make that work. But I do think if you're going to try to get more games in, if you're trying to get 8 to 10, you're going to have to start earlier. James Franklin was talking about like a dome setup. Like, can you go to different venues to play in that type of, you know, weather indoors? So I'm kind of really fascinated to see how it works. I think, again, the number one thing I guess I would start with was the amount of games. Number 2 would be when I want it to end by. I think that, you know, a lot of programs get pretty physical in spring ball. So to me, my end date would be around when spring ball normally ends. So I think like by the end of April, like that would be the time frame I'd work from. But it sounds like some of these guys want to go earlier, want to go shorter. I mean, what as a player, what would you prefer?
So this is where I get a little bit twisted up because Jeff Braun put out that model and it was fantastic and they broke it down and it made it seem like, you know, the thing that they were counting was like padded practices. So it made it seem like it was less tough on an athlete's body. But where I'd be concerned as a player is not the padded practices because players understand and they're more under control with the tempo sometimes and all that kind of stuff. It's the non-contact, non-padded practices where you see guys blowing out Achilles and tearing ACLs and stuff. And so I'd love to see that comparison. For me, I think as a player, if you're giving me 6 games, regardless of when it happens in that calendar for a winter spring, you can't convince me that 6 games really matters in the grand scheme of things. You can't convince me that, you know, like Justin Fields, why would you play in that? You're not getting a Heisman out of 6 games. You're not getting All-American out of 6 games. Like, those are the questions I start to ask is where does a spring season really matter in the grand scheme of things? And then the second question off of that is, for a spring season to matter, do we end up taking more off of the fall season, which everybody traditionally cares about? And so I think from a player wear and tear standpoint, it's cool. Like, you can convince me, you can talk me into it. NFL, they play 20 games, including preseason. You can talk me into it, but from a how much does it actually matter standpoint is where I start to be like, no, I don't want to do that.
So that's a really interesting question because I think there's also, when you do the math, right, of like how much it would cost to try to make this happen, but then to try to recoup some of your media money, like, you know, there's competing interests, right? Because I think probably the easiest way and might end up being the most cost-effective way. Again, we don't know how much money people would get to broadcast these games in the spring, but maybe the better outcome is to just not try, right? To just wipe it all out and go to next fall. The problem there, because of what you're saying, I mean, the incentives, you know, who's going to play, you know, is this going to even feel like a season? Does it feel worthwhile? We know that their eligibility is not really going to be affected, which is good. You know, no matter how many games anyone is able to play. But the question is, even if you know that probably the most prudent decision is to just not try to play in the winter or spring, why would you say that now? To me, I think you have to pursue this. You have to go down that rabbit hole, look at different models, keep hope alive. Like, imagine being a player and not having anything until next fall.
I know.
Like,
the hope thing is what kills me though. Like, hope is not a strategy. And that's why I understand that you need to dangle a carrot out in front of athletes, coaches, fans, everybody.
if you have nothing to play towards until next September, that's tough.
It's so tough, but like, okay, so you put out this false hope. There's going to come a point where they're going to realize that it's probably not a great setup to try to play twice in one calendar year. and then they end up pulling the plug on it. How many people are going to be so pissed off? You told us we were going to get it. Like, it's the hardest job to have right now. I don't envy anybody who has to make these decisions. Now I get to sit back and we talk about it, and it's fun.
Right.
But
right.
like, you know, this is somebody's job, and it sucks, but it's really tough. All right, so let's move on to some more personal things. I want people to kind of get to know you as a person a little bit. And one of the cool things about you is you're one of the best at what you do. And so my question for that is, has this always been something that you saw yourself doing as a little kid? Or is this something that, you know, as you got older and you started, you know, you were in college and you were following sports and everything else, you developed a true passion for?
Yeah, no, I did not. There are sports writers and sports journalists who say that they, you know, were they were making up little newspapers on napkins, you know, when they were 4. That was not me. I played sports growing up. I mean, my sports through high school were tennis in the fall, basketball in the winter, softball in the spring. Softball was my main sport. And yeah, so I was pretty math and science-y through high school, and I thought that I was going to go to business school. I thought my dad owned his own business. I thought that was going to be my path. I was going to major in business or econ. And I get to Michigan, didn't really know anyone. It was, you know, I grew up in New Jersey, big school. No one from my high school went there. Everyone went to like I went to a private school. So everyone went to like the Muhlenbergs and like Colgates and this tiny little, you know, liberal arts colleges. And I, you know, erred on the side of going bigger. And so I get to Michigan, I'm moving into my dorm, welcome week. And I meet a girl across the hall from me who's a sophomore. And we're talking about our dream jobs at some point. And she wants to be a heart surgeon because it's like noble job. And I'm like, oh, my dream job would be to write for Sports Illustrated. And she's like, oh, you should just join the student paper here. Like my friend works in the news staff. So her friend got me the email of the sports editor. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to need to join some things to make some friends. So I go to the first meeting, which was the day after the first football game, which my first football game at Michigan was App State. Yeah, that was my introduction, first time in the big house. And I go to the student newspaper meeting the next day. And they had this whole like big special section about Chad Henne, Mike Hart, and Jake Long coming back. They wanted to compete for a national championship, right? They had spent all summer working on this special section. They tear it all up and they're like, all right, we got to do like what the hell happened story. So I am, you know, this scared little freshman, and I'm sitting there and I volunteered to pick up a story on like ultimate Frisbee. And I'm watching this and it's pretty interesting. And I'm like, wow, it's pretty cool that like there's these 4 college seniors that are writing like authoritatively like what went wrong for Michigan and publishing it. And so basically like anything college, you know, you make a couple friends, keep coming back to meetings. And I was terrible. And I just like, you know, got a little bit better. And then a family friend recommended I apply for an internship at the Trentonian in Trenton, New Jersey, which is kind of like a tabloid, but like a legit sports section. So the summer after my freshman year, which is early for internships, but I interned covering the Trenton Thunder, the AA team for the Yankees. I did Little League baseball and softball, drag racing, which by the way is really hard to cover. It's a 3-second race and like there's not much to write about. So during that internship, that's when I realized that like this was something that I really liked and wanted to do. And when I was working nights and weekends, it didn't feel like I was missing anything, which is hard when you're 18 and everyone's back from college and hanging out every night. But I didn't feel like I was missing anything because I felt like it was rewarding. It was something that, you know, it didn't feel like work. And so once I got to that point, I like decided, you know what, I'm going to go for this. And everyone tells you not to because journalism is dying and there's no jobs. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to pursue it, work really hard and, you know, see, like I can always pivot if there are no jobs. So I ended up covering hockey, basketball and football at Michigan. I also covered football for the Detroit Free Press my junior year, helped out with them. And then I, you know, interned at the Cape Cod Times, covered Cape League baseball after my sophomore year, interned at USA Today after my junior year, and interned at the Boston Globe after my senior year. And, you know, I'd kept in touch with people at USA Today and they had an opening. So my first job first full-time job was like a digital editor. I was posting other people's stories. I was doing slideshows. I had to teach myself how to code for like the bubble tracker we were doing for the tournament. So it was a lot. And, you know, it's not what you want to be doing, right? You want to be out there. You want to be interviewing people, writing the stories yourself. And, you know, after a couple of months, there was a restructuring, very like media in the 2020s, like there was a restructuring, people had to reapply for their jobs. And you could apply for any job. So I applied to be a college basketball reporter because I was like covering college basketball, but just not out and reporting on it. And I was able to get that. And then, you know, then it just kind of went from there. Then I'm like, all right, now there's 350 teams. I don't know anyone. What do I do to build relationships? And to start from scratch. And then after a few years, I added some college football to my duties. I did 2 Olympics. I covered swimming at the London and Rio Olympics and went from there. And now I've been at The Athletic for 3 years because I joined when we were launching our college football national vertical. So the company was really small. It was about 50 people. And this is the summer of 2017. And now there's like 500 employees. Like it's crazy. But yeah, I mean, I stumbled into it. Like if I don't meet that girl in my dorm, I don't know that I ever connect the dots between like, I love reading Sports Illustrated cover to cover with, okay, like this is actually real people do these jobs and it's possible to do it. So it's been super cool. Obviously I do work with BTN. That's how we met. Well, and I'm probably interviewed you back in the day because I did that 2014 team. I was assigned them for USA Today. We had 4 college writers. So it was the first year of the playoff. Everyone got one team. And I got Ohio State. So I was like in Columbus, like that entire December, which I don't know if you remember, but it was really cold. It was like 9 degrees, like the entire December. So I covered your team and then got assigned Michigan State the next year. So all of my like Michigan grad friends like could not believe. They were like, why do you keep tweeting about Ohio State and Michigan State so much? And I'm like, they're my assignment. But, you know, so anyway, it's been a wild ride. But again, I keep going back to like how, you know, if you don't go, like Michigan wasn't my top choice. If I don't go to Michigan, if I don't meet this one person, like I don't end up doing this type of career. And so I'm not like a huge like destiny and like, you know, everything happens for a reason person, but I am in terms of like, you know, you think where you go to college is the biggest decision that you're ever going to make. And like, you know, I wanted to go to Duke and I got waitlisted. I don't think this would have happened if I go to Duke, you know? And so I think that's one thing that's important to take away when, you know, especially when you're facing like your first major disappointments or, you know, decisions. My sister and brother went through it after I did and not getting into their top choices. And it feels devastating. And then you realize like that there are twists and turns that would only happen if you are in a certain place at a certain time.
No, that timing thing is actually big. And I'm pretty much a destiny person. Like I think that things line up the way that they're supposed to and they happen for a reason. And so it's really interesting to hear that story. And then you talk obviously about getting into media, and my journey into media is like the easy path. You former player, you know, you get the job or whatever. And like I'm known for my expertise. Like I know football. That's why people want to talk to me. For you, it's so different because you really have to show why you're an expert and you have to put all the hard work in. And like, you know, our days in the studio for BTN are super long days, but I know as a writer, you have long days and then you have deadlines you have to meet and your people you're trying to nail down. And there's so much that goes into it, but still you've been able to put out very, very accurate information and you've cultivated such awesome relationships within the industry. What went into the process of building those relationships? Because like you said, you go into college basketball, you got 300 some odd teams, you don't know a lot of people, but you're able to make your way through to where you're a trusted voice and a trusted source.
It's really hard. And it was really intimidating to start from scratch and just look around and think that other people have been doing this for a lot longer and knew everybody. So the example I always give is Jay Wright. So I was living in DC and there would be, you know, you'd get emails about like, okay, there's a Coaches versus Cancer luncheon in Baltimore or something. And, you know, these things are not ultimately that useful for work purposes, but I was like, you know, I'm going to go to anything that is local that I can drive to. I was going to go to AAU events that were in the area just to sit on the benches and introduce myself to coaches. That's how I met Mike Bray. But I go to this coach's luncheon and I make sure to introduce myself to Jay Wright. So this is what networking is. It's like you drive an hour both ways, you sit through a 2-hour luncheon for 5 minutes. Yeah. 5 minutes, handshake, and you talk to Jay Wright and you give him your card, right? And he was so nice. And he was like all excited that I was from Jersey. His wife's a Jersey girl. They have a place down the shore. And he was like, Nicole, I'd love for you to meet my staff. Like, you're new, like come up anytime. We'll have lunch. I'll show you the campus. So I take him up on that. Instead of like assuming it's just polite, I'm like, you know what? He made the offer. I'm going to do it. So I ended up planning a trip. So Villanova wasn't very good that year. I don't know if they made the tournament that year. But I decided to plan a trip to, again, wherever I could drive, right? So I went to VCU for a day to see Shaka, which again, everybody knew him, but I was like, I need to also know him. Yep. And then the next day I went to Lehigh to see CJ McCollum, who had just beaten Duke the year before. And I had done a couple of stories with him. And I still talk to the Lehigh coach, like to this day. And I drove there for like a Tuesday night game that no one was at, just to, again, shake hands. And, if I text CJ right now, he'd respond. I mean, not if he's, scoring 40 points in a game or whatever, but like, so I had that. And then the next day went to Villanova. And Jay like put me on the golf cart, gave me a whole tour, had lunch in the mess hall, like all of these things, met the entire staff. And so you're thinking, you feel good. You leave that day and you're like, all right, like, I feel like, this is someone who wants to build a relationship with me as well. Like it's a two-way street. And you fast forward, they win he wins his first national championship. My job at that game is to stay with Villanova as late as possible, write about stuff that no one's seeing. And I am sitting down with Jay and his wife at 2 a.m. as they're finally eating in an empty ballroom next to the Villanova party, getting an exclusive interview because of these relationships where you go out of your way to see people. I mean, for Shaka, like when VCU would play Fordham when I was living in New York, I'd go to Fordham on a Wednesday night for a game that was a blowout because Fordham was bad, but I would go just for that 5 minutes handshake at the end. And so I think that's like how I approach all of this. Is obviously FaceTime is important. And I think also people can tell if you literally are only going to pump them for information and the only times you're going to reach out to them are, did so-and-so get injured? Did you take this job? Right. And I like to think that hopefully that the people I cover think that I do care about them as people, and remember things about their lives and, have inside jokes almost because we've talked about things in their personal life, or my personal life that transcend that. And so, I also think I've always tried to treat people fairly. I'm not going to, burn somebody on something that is off the record just for, Twitter likes or whatever. Right. And so it's balancing all of that. And then also, again, just even if it's inconvenient, like going out of your way to make time for people, because I think they understand that that's inconvenient and it says something to them that you went out of your way to go make sure it was that important. It was a priority for you to spend a little bit of time with that person. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's just kind of like how I started to build a network of any sort. And then, the more you're doing that and it starts to come naturally, then you get in the position where like Jay just wins the national championship and you can be there because he's waving you in, because you have that relationship.
So I think this is like what you just said, I think is powerful, obviously in your career and what you do, but just for anybody who is like in business, for example, like you drive a couple of hours each way, you sit through the game, and then at the end, you only get 5 minutes. And so what we see is that 5 minutes at the end. What people don't see is all of that work that you had to do. And then, of course, that 5 minutes, based off of the work that you did, ends up becoming you get to spend a night after a national championship and really get that inside information, that perspective nobody else gets, which is huge. But it's really interesting to hear. And we're kind of that age where everything is done in a microwave and it's instant gratification. Yes. And there is nothing about that process that happens quickly. I think the other thing that really stands out, and this is something that in 2020, I feel like people need to hear, but you talked about just being a good person and having respect and not burning people and just building a genuine relationship. And I feel like so many times, again, it's like that social media connection where if it's not instant, it's not going to happen, or like you talk to somebody and then you fall off. But building relationships is still important, like regardless of what you do. You're dealing with people a lot of the time, so it's always important to treat people the right way. So this is one thing that we have had conversations about. You're obviously in a male-dominated industry, sports. You're dealing with a lot of male athletes. Obviously, covering football, you're dealing with basically only males there. A lot of your colleagues are men, and it seems like you're not going to let anything about anything stop you. And so, I guess the question for me is there some point of pride for you being able to break through some of the barriers that you're doing? And then the other question would be, what challenges have come along the way with that?
Yeah, I do think there's an element of pride. It's certainly not as, challenging as it was in the 70s or the 80s, right? Becoming the first woman to be in a locker room. But like in 2008, the minor league Yankees team tried to block me from going in their locker room, like 2008.
Wow.
So like these things still happen. And, and I think still, you go in somewhere and someone, the thing about being a woman in sports is that the assumption is that you don't know sports. So like when I was covering primarily basketball, very basic sport, by the way, like grew up playing, but there's like, it's very straightforward. Sometimes I would get, you'd be in the gym at an AAU tournament, the coaches would be like, "Oh, did you play?" And I'm sure that they didn't mean this as like vetting my knowledge of basketball, but they kind of did, right? Like that's kind of what they're asking. And so I always had a go-to answer about like, how bad my varsity team was in high school. We won 2 games and I just like couldn't deal with losing that many games, like, and quit. And, so I had a little funny answer to it, and it doesn't get asked in football, obviously, because people aren't going to ask me if I played football, but it's coming from this assumption that you don't have the knowledge, where like I have seen so many of my male colleagues who are not in shape, who don't have an athletic bone in their body, never get questioned about like how the sport works, or any of their questions. And, I remember, one of my female colleagues, like, was covering Florida early in her career, and she asked, a question about special teams and about, just a certain alignment. And like, the coach is like, "Oh, wow, I'm impressed that, a woman asked this." And so it's like, these are people who are our age going through this. Like, it's not like this was the 70s and 80s. Like, this is just an ingrained element where it's a surprise that a woman might be super knowledgeable about sports. So that's a challenge, like to just go in where the assumption is that you don't know anything. So you're constantly having to prove that you do. Where, or even on Twitter, if you put out an opinion, like the response is, that you shouldn't be in the space, like go back to the kitchen or whatever. And instead of like, argue with me, tell me I have a bad opinion, like give me sports arguments, like all my male colleagues get. So, that's where it's like the day-to-day basis. And then just other slights about just, how, we all know how boys clubs work, right? So, just, if your buddy is with a coach, like in a certain way, or you always go out drinking, like, maybe you're going to be in settings that I'm not necessarily going to want to be at 3 a.m. And I'm going to work on building my relationships at happy hour instead of, the closing down the bars. But is that going to impact my career and future access and things like that? And so, and then setting boundaries and all of those pieces too. So it's a lot to think about on a day-to-day basis. It's almost like to do the same job as everyone else, you just have to put a lot more energy and effort and planning every single day into that job. Like, how am I asking for a phone number for a player or a coach? What tone am I using? What time am I texting them? What time am I calling them? Just all of these things that my male colleagues never think about, right? Like, cause why would they? They don't have to think about how they ask for a phone number. So, it's all of those things. But then when things go well, when you have a story you're really proud of, or you break news, it's incredibly rewarding because, I know how much work went into that to be in that position to get that story. And I think that that's what's been very cool about during all of this, when I have been able to break news, is, like it matters when I hear from someone, if I do a TV hit and the producer's like, "I'm so excited that we have a woman to talk about this." Like, because all of the times when sports escalates and we have to bring in an expert, it's a guy.
Sure.
because there's just not that many of us. And so I think, you know, as someone who grew up watching SportsCenter and you had female anchors and you know, you saw female reporters talking about sports, I think it's important to see women talk and give their opinions about sports. That's like the shift that we're in now. You know, and I think that is awesome. So if I can like contribute to that at all, just a little bit, I am very happy about that, because it's hard, but it's easier when you see people doing the types of work that you might want to do someday.
Yep.
It's easier to envision doing it. And so yeah, so I mean, it's hard a lot of times. There's great days, there are rough days, like in any job. And when there are good days, like you do feel like you're hopefully, you know, making things easier for other women, when there's just, as you know, when it's, you know, when you're in an industry that's so dominated by a certain type of person, yep. What you do reflects on everyone else. So if you can do a good job, it does help other women in a male dominated field.
For sure. And I think your point about having those images for young women to see is huge. And I talk about this all the time. Like, I feel like I am as driven as I am, and I've been able to strive the way I have because my father was a very successful, driven Black man. And so that was always what I got to see. But when you look to industry or you look to media, and you don't always see those images. So it is really important, and it's a big deal. And it's funny always hearing the perspective too. I think funny is probably the wrong word, but like it's a shame that guys would never have to think about their tone and their demeanor when they ask for a phone number for a player that they want to get an interview with. But you in your position, like, that's just one of the many things that you have to be concerned with.
I always will say, can I get your number in case I have any other questions for this story? Like, it all just comes out like that, right? Because I don't want it to just be like, can I get your number to stay in touch? Because like, right. You're trying to be super clear all along. But, you know, you have to think about that, you know, and it's something that you learn early. I have friends in this profession that wore fake engagement rings so that people don't hit on them. Like, it's all of these little things, like what you're wearing. It's a lot. It can be exhausting.
Yeah. No, I mean, that has to be exhausting. Like, it's two completely different perspectives. As a guy, I'm out there to do my job. And it's like, you've got to do two jobs at once. You've got to protect yourself and your image and who you are and your safety potentially. And then also, like, I got to get the damn interview. Yes. Like, oh my gosh.
It's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So outside of sports, what are your passions and your hobbies?
It's a good question. I've added new hobbies. So I realized I didn't really have that many hobbies. Outside of my dog, who, by the way, I don't know if we're recording video, but he's right here.
Your dog gets as much FaceTime as any dog in America right now.
Yes. He's loving the work from home life. So I've taken up grilling and baking both during quarantine, and have become very obsessed. So if you have any good recipes for grilling, there's like a communal grill set up on the roof of my building. And so that's been fun. I occasionally knit because I am also kind of an 80-year-old woman at heart.
Did you get that from the girl who was knitting in that story you wrote?
Well, no, but I actually do think that's how I in part found her, because I could tell that she was crocheting, not knitting. And that helped me eventually go down a rabbit hole. I spent a few hours to try to find her name. Or anything about her, but I think it helped that I knew it was crocheting. We're talking about the Kansas student who went viral. And so, yeah, I mean, I have a Peloton, as you know, and try to get to that, hang out with the dog. But yeah, it's a tough job where it's a lot of nights and weekends. And so it's hard to have exactly the same hobbies as everyone else, which is why, you know, cooking, grilling, baking, like they're very therapeutic and they're fun, and they've been able to do it in quarantine. So that's been nice. But yeah, I guess so. And reading, I mean, I love reading books that are not about sports in particular. So all of my hobbies are very quarantine friendly, which has been good.
No, that is good. I'm an avid reader, so I can resonate with that. And then you've seen my Instagram stories, but I've been cooking my ass off.
Yeah, I'm impressed.
It's a detriment, honestly, to my figure, but that's neither here nor there. So I wanted to ask you about this, actually, because you know that I am into fashion. Like, I like being the best dressed when I'm on set, the whole deal. And so I've noticed that some of your outfits have been fantastic. So my question is, for when you're getting ready to do an interview that's going to air on TV, what's your go-to? And then for a casual day, let's say that you're just hanging out in Chicago, what's your go-to outfit?
So it's interesting because now that everything's being done like via Skype and Zoom, you really only have to have like a nice shirt. So you can wear like a nice sweater or blouse. But for like BTN, it's always like a dress. Like it's always the full 9 yards. I actually, a lot of times for TV stuff, did Rent the Runway. So you can get like the nice brands, but you're swapping out. So I would do the unlimited one and you would get like 4 different items at any time. And then you can swap them out, which is good because, you know, if you're a woman on TV, you can't really wear the same outfit all the time.
No.
So yeah, so like I'm, you know, a solid colors person. And then in real life, I like stripes. And I've been doing a lot of, I mean, it's been very hard to wear like jeans and like actually like form-fitting clothes during all of this. So it's a lot of leggings and, you know, kind of oversized sweatshirts and things like that. But actually, so my building opened like when it was allowed. So I feel like I've actually only been wearing like sweats and leggings and then bathing suits, just like nothing in between.
Literally as casual as you can get.
As casual as you can get. I have all these like really cute sundresses that I just have nowhere to wear them to. But yeah, no, it's definitely spending too much despite having nowhere to go during all of this. But yeah, you are the best dressed person on set, which by the way, with someone like Jerry or Howard, not too hard to do.
No,
but
it's really not that hard. Especially Jerry, he's like, I know his wife is probably picking out all of his outfits.
I know.
He doesn't give a damn. But no, it's been, I'm the person, I call it my outfit, like, or my uniform, but I wear jeans and a polo almost every day that I'm not like really dressed up. Where I don't have appointments, like that's my lounge wear. So
that's not loungy.
Well, when you got stretch jeans, it is loungy. So
okay, I mean, again, like actual, just like you could wear Lululemons, like you can wear comfortable clothes.
I could, but I just prefer the look of denim.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna get you out of here with this. It's a 2-minute drill. It's just rapid fire. I'm gonna ask you some questions. I don't want you to think about the answers. I just want you to answer them.
Okay.
All right, first question, dream vacation.
I've already gone on a couple that would answer this question, so let me think. Well, the vacation I wanted to go in March was Italy. I was going to go to Denmark. So Europe, theoretically.
Go to Italy in March.
Well, I mean, honestly, like now they won't let us there. So, so I'm going to say like a European trip to some countries that I haven't been to.
Okay, surf or turf?
Turf.
Okay. If you had one superpower, what would it be?
I think I would like to fly.
Okay. Favorite person you've covered?
Ooh, this is a good one. Honestly, it's probably James Conner. I got to do the first big story on him after he came back, after he had cancer. And he's just delightful human, so nice, so happy that he gets drafted then by the Steelers, stays in town, having a great career so far. Just genuinely awesome person. So let's go James Conner.
That's awesome. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Best advice I received is just the saying that, like, you know, I found the harder I work, the luckier I seem to get, because I think a lot of people think that to get, you know, especially in our profession, because everyone loves sports and thinks they can do these jobs, they think it's all luck. But I do think that, again, there's all that extra work about networking and building relationships, even, you know, within the profession that people don't see, that makes it seem like, oh, wow, so-and-so just got handed this job, instead of like the countless hours and phone calls and, you know, drafts of stories and all these things. So that saying has always kind of driven me. It's not necessarily advice, but it's just something that's helpful for me to think about.
No, I agree with that. I feel like hard work and luck work in unison. So that's really, really good advice there. What's your biggest pet peeve?
Biggest pet peeve are people who lie. I also hate slow walkers.
Ooh, slow walkers.
Terrible.
Yeah, you got places to be and you don't have time to waste getting there.
I lived in New York for 6 years. Like you just can't be a slow walker.
Oh, welcome to the Midwest. Finally, if we're making a movie about your life, who is playing you?
Oh, well, this is an easy one. You know, my celebrity doppelganger is Aubrey Plaza.
There
So
you go.
very easy. I literally get asked if I'm the girl in Parks and Rec all the time. So boom, maybe I can finally meet her if we do a movie about my life and she's in it.
There we go. Let's get to work on the movie about your life then. I think we found who's going to star in there. All right. Well, I just want to thank you, Nicole, for joining the Who's Who of the Joshua Perry Show. Lots of really good information getting into that college football, but also learning a little bit about your career and how you've taken a little bit of a unique path from what you thought you would be doing. Hopefully you'll join us again.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.